Hello, everybody. I'm Robert Barden. I'm the host for today's webinar. I'm here at North Carolina State University in Raleigh, North Carolina, and we will be talking about pond management. And this webinar is being brought to you today by the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. And before we get into introducing the speaker and everything, I'm going to touch on logistics real quick for today's webinar. As I indicated, you can download the slides from the link I provided in the chat. They're available on today's page where you join the webinar. Just scroll down to the bottom. If you're still on that page, you can get the file or click on the link in the chat. We're also going to be using the Q&A feature in Zoom. It says a little icon with Q&A. You can click on that and enter any questions that you have for our presenter today, and we will address those after his presentation. I ask you to minimize the chat in the chat feature to things that are pertinent to today's topic. If you're having some troubles or something with Zoom, I'll try to help you here online through that process. Otherwise, if it's a topic related to our presentation, please use the Q&A feature so we don't lose those in the chat and we can get them addressed. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our host today, Leslie McCormick with the North Carolina Tree Farm Program.
Thank you, Bob. Our presenter today is Roger Pittman, who is president of Triangle Pond Management in Raleigh, North Carolina. Roger has a degree in fisheries, wildlife, and conservation biology from North Carolina State University. In his role with Triangle Pond Management, he helps landowners achieve their pond management objectives, whether it's growing bigger bass, treating aquatic weeds, or keeping their ponds healthy and attractive. I'd like to remind the landowners who are enrolled in the North Carolina Tree Farm Program that as a benefit of your membership, you can get a 10% discount on all products and services from Triangle Pond Management. If you would like to learn more about member benefits, please reach out to the North Carolina Tree Farm Program. We will have our contact information posted at the end of the webinar. Roger, thank you for sharing your expertise with us today on hot topics in pond management.
All right, thank you, Leslie. Let me get the slides up here real quick, guys, and we'll get started. All right, so we're going to be talking about hot topics in pond management, what we get calls on every day. We got a lot of good content, so we're going to jump right into it. The first one I want to talk about is plants. We get calls on plants all the time. Some common questions that we get are, what is this plant? I've got algae. What can I do about it? My water is green. What can I do? What is this? Are chemicals and herbicides safe to use in my pond? Will treatments hurt my fish, turtles, etc.? These are questions that we get. So I want to start by talking about the different categories of plants. We're going to talk about them kind of at a high level view, but we're going to talk about algae, factors that contribute to algal growth and plant growth. We're going to go through some plant ID, some common plants that we see day in and day out, talk about potential impacts they might have on your system, and then some different management approaches you can take to remediate. So to start off with the algae, planktonic algae, broad category, free-floating plants. They're microscopic. In large quantities, they turn your watercolor green, blue, green, brown, etc. There's what we would call good and bad types of planktonics. The green algae are typically considered a good planktonic, and they're the base of your food chain. So having a pond that's green might not necessarily be a bad thing if you're trying to grow big bass or big fish. The next kind of broad category is filamentous, what we would describe as string algae. They're single-celled plants that form chains, threads, or filaments. When they become dense, they start on the bottom, but they can actually float and form mats on your pond, and that gets to be unsightly. They can provide some habitat for micro and macro invertebrates, and some examples of green filamentous algae might be Spirogyra, Pathophora, and some examples of filamentous cyanobacteria might be Anabaena, oscillatoria, Lyngbia. So the next category would be what people call blue-green algae. These are the cyanobacteria. They're not actually true algae, but they're a prokaryotic bacteria that can photosynthesize. They can be unicellular, they can be filamentous, they can also be colonial. They turn the water of those different shades of color. That's kind of where they get their name, blue, green, brownish, etc. And in high quantities and when they get dense, they can be toxic. They produce cyanotoxins, which can be harmful to fish, animals, and humans. You guys have probably heard stories like in North Carolina, we've had some dogs and stuff like that die at Jordan Lake. So that stuff is out there. And then we've got advanced algae, macroalgae. Examples of these would be Chara and Nutella. They're fairly common. They look like a submerged aquatic weed, but they're actually algae. They lack in a true root system. In smaller quantities and if managed, they can provide pretty good habitat, and they filter the water. But if left unchecked, they can become dense and unsightly, and that can create problems for pond owners depending on what you're trying to use your body of water for. So I threw this one in here. What is this? We get a lot of calls on this guy. This is not an algae or a plant. It's actually what they call a bryozoan. And bryozoans are colonies of small aquatic invertebrates. They filter food from the water by extending tentacles. And you typically see them growing along the pond bank. You'll see them attached to down debris and stuff like that. They're considered harmless if found in your pond. It's typically an indicator of good water quality. The only trouble I've really seen with them is they can tend to clog up intakes, or if you've got an aeration system, they might get around that and clog up that water flow. So we're going to go into, that was the algae, the broad categories of algae. Now I want to jump into kind of the factors that relate to algae growth. The graph here to the right, or the illustration to the right, kind of shows nutrients coming into a pond. With those nutrients, you've had those algae that feed off that. They live, they die, they increase nutrients in the sediment loading. That contributes to new growth, and the cycle kind of just continues to go. So the first factor that contributes would be light, so sunlight. Varying intensities can result in blooms. Some different algae are affected adversely by increased light, some are not. Some cyanobacteria actually have pigments that can protect them from intense UV. So if you've got a lot of light getting into a pond, you might have a die-off of green algae and have a bloom of cyanobacteria, and that's not what really people want. And then some algae have resting stages where they can go dormant until conditions are optimal, and then they'll bloom then. The next factor would be temperature. So cold versus warm water. Different species of algae prefer cold water. Different species prefer warm water. The graph here to the right kind of shows as the year goes along, like in the early spring and summer, you might have a bloom of diatoms. Towards the middle of the year, you might have green algae blooming, and then towards the end of the year, you might have cyanobacteria. And anywhere in between, there's no hard science on that. Algae's kind of going to do what algae's going to do. Water mixing might be another contributing factor. So aeration systems, fish movement, wind action, these can all contribute to that. Mixing can be a good thing. It can add dissolved oxygen. Some algae like green algae and diatoms can actually benefit from mixing. And then again, cyanobacteria might be discouraged from it. That's not a hard, fast rule, but in general. And then generally speaking, mixing is good and adds some benefits, but different cyanobacteria might thrive in perfect conditions. Nutrients, nitrogen and phosphorus being big contributors there. So those contribute to algal growth and blooms, and you can get nutrients in your pond from fertilizer washing in from lawns, fields, golf courses, leaf debris coming from nearby trees or grass clippings when you're mowing around the pond can contribute somewhat. Wildlife excretions like geese and waterfowl and pets that can contribute. And then as those nutrients enter the pond, they tend to build up over time in the sediments. And then they can be released at any given point, and that might result in blooms. So potential impacts. How does it affect us as pond owners? Cyanobacteria can release toxins. So if you've got blooms of cyanobacteria, that's no good. We don't want that. They can make a body of water less usable for recreation, whether it be swimming, boating, fishing. You've got the increased potential for fish kills. If you've got, a bloom of, say, green algae, and they're producing oxygen during the day and they consume it at night, if there's a die-off, there could be varying levels of DO, and that could result in potential fish kills. Increased algal growth can inhibit other growth of maybe wanted submerged plants, which might be contributing to habitat. So there's that consideration. Matted algae, when it's floating, generally is unsightly and doesn't look good. And then planktonic blooms can result in a pond looking like pea soup, so it might just appear, green, and that might be ugly and unfavorable. So transitioning off of algae, I want to go into the other categories of plants that we deal with on a daily basis, and those are going to be submerged plants. Submerged plants are rooted, but they're under the water. They don't ever come out of the water. Examples of this would be hydrilla, naiads, pondweeds, milfoils, parrot's feather. And we're going to look at a couple examples in some future slides. Emergent plants, those guys they're rooted, but they come out of the water. An example of that would be, alligator weed, lotus, cattails, smartweed, spikerush, primrose. And then you've got free floating plants. They're not rooted, they float in the water column at the top. Azolla, duckweed, and watermeal would be examples of those. So some real quick plant ID, and we're not going to get deep into this just because of time, but I want to show you some examples of stuff you might be seeing around your pond. Slender spikerush is one that we see a lot. It's hard to manage. It's hard to maintain. Very thin leaves. It's actually got, you could call it submerged, but it does come out of the water and can grow and look more like a grass. We see a lot of pondweeds. There's a bunch of them, but two of the most common would be slender pondweed and American pondweed. Slender pondweed on the left kind of has narrower leaves, and then American pondweed kind of has broader leaves that come up and float on the surface. Hydrilla is a non-native, highly invasive plant. That is, no one likes this guy. It can get thick really, really fast. We see naiads out in the field. Southern naiad is actually native on the left, and then you've got European or brittle naiad on the right. Southern naiad's got slender leaves, and the European version on the right kind of has serrated leaves and a red stem. You can tell the difference in the two pictures there. Duckweed is one we hear a lot about. We get a lot of calls on duckweed. Usually because it's been misidentified and people are trying to treat it like it's an algae when it's not, and the copper that they're spraying on it has no effect. It's got lots of, it's a plant that when in mass, it's 2 or 3 little leaves that are floating on a root system, and when they get dense, they look like algae on top of the water, but it's actually a plant. Watermeal is another one that's kind of similar to duckweed. This kind of gets mistaken for algae as well. It's a very small plant. You put it in your fingers, it kind of feels gritty. It's treated the same way, but you can't treat it like an algae. Azolla is similar to duckweed and watermeals. It's a small, tiny plant. When it gets in mass, it kind of looks like it can cover a pond, and it gets referred to as algae, but it's not. It's got kind of a reddish tint to its leaves. Water shield's another one that we see. In the lily family, it's got a red flower there, and it kind of looks like a shield floating on the water and a red stem. Cattails are another common plant. Everybody has seen these. Seed pod's very identifiable. Creeping water primrose. This guy's distinguished by its yellow flowers when it's in bloom, and it can start at the shoreline and go right on out into the water. It won't grow in the deepest parts of a pond, but it can if it's a shallow pond. Smartweed is similar, but it's got a purple flower, and it more or less grows on the shoreline. We don't see it get out into the water much. Alligator weed is one that kind of gets confused with the primrose from time to time, but you can tell them apart from the white flower when it's in bloom, and the stems on this plant are not as red in color. parrot's feather. Might look like a milfoil when it's underwater, submerged a little bit, but when it heads out, it turns into that green leaf there, easily identifiable. And then the last one I have pictures of for you guys is bladderwort. It has a yellow flower when it's in bloom. And it's actually, if you get down into the leaves, it has small little bladders that give it its name, bladderwort. So potential impacts we can see from submerged, emergent, floating plants. Again, access for recreational use. If you have a dense mass of plants, it's hard to fish, hard to boat, hard to swim, depending on what you're trying to do with your pond. It can get unsightly, being as it's ugly, it's not very aesthetically pleasing. You still have the chance for dissolved oxygen swings, which could lead to fish kills. Could become habitat for mosquito breeding, especially if you have stagnant water. And then excessive plants could block inlets, inflows coming in, feeding your pond, and outlets letting the water going out of your pond. So that's the plants. Let's talk about options for remediation. So there's proactive things you can do. You can treat or reduce the factors that support the growth. You can introduce biological controls such as sterile grass carp. Reactively, you can remove the growth mechanically with a machine or by hand. You can reactively treat with approved aquatic labeled herbicides. Or you can do a combination approach of all those things above. So I want to dive into that real quick. So on a proactive level, you can mitigate factors related to plant growth, and that could be controlling nutrients that enter the pond. I've seen this done with installation of forebays or settling pools. So you kind of catch that initial influx of nutrients coming in, you let it settle out, and the remaining water enters your pond. You can apply products like pond dyes, which kind of act like sunglasses for your pond, which reduce the amount of available sunlight for plants. Aeration systems are always recommended. There's a bunch of benefits for aeration, and we're going to get into that in the next topic. You can apply products like beneficial bacteria, which help break down excessive nutrients over time. And then you can use phosphate and nutrient lockers like products like Phoslock and Utrizorb do a pretty good job. Talk a little bit about grass carp because they are an effective biological control. They're called triploid grass carp. They're sterile, so they don't reproduce. 10 to 15 per acre is typically recommended for control. They're effective on tender, submerged young weeds like hydrilla, cara, elodea, bladderwort, fanwort, coontail, pondweed, and naiads. They're a little less effective on duckweed, milfoils, parrot feather, and algae, and they're not really recommended for watermeal, eelgrass, smartweed, lotus, lilies, or cattails. Really anything that's got a thicker outer shell or a cuticle that doesn't work well with their digestion, so they don't favor that. Physical removal can be an option. You can remove the plants by hand or with a machine. It does get fairly labor intensive and can be expensive. The top picture here is a spillway we did in Fayetteville that we had to remove by hand just because we had no choice. We couldn't get a machine to it, but you can see it's effective. And then, like I said, again, a machine that can get it is also a viable option. Herbicide application is usually what we turn to if we're trying to get a quick reactive result. So when you apply herbicides and use them correctly, you can get quick results in most cases. They can be very economical when compared to physical removal. Keep in mind that when you treat the plant, you don't always treat the cause or the factor that's contributing to the plant growth. When we apply herbicides, we're using a sprayer system that's typically rigged up on a boat or an ATV. And for smaller ponds, we use backpack systems. Most treatments get excellent results as long as you use the correct product for the target plant and you have good coverage. So good herbicide to plant contact. This is a herbicide application that we did on a shoreline plant. I believe this was primrose. We did a mix of glyphosate, a mazifer, and a surfactant. 2 weeks after the application, the plant's basically eradicated, and all you have left is stems from the growth that will eventually break down and be removed over time. This is a herbicide application on duckweed. not algae, duckweed. So we use flumioxazine on this plant, and 2 weeks after application, you can see we've got basically 95% control on the plant and the water's cleared up. Talk real quickly about systemic versus contact herbicides. So systemic herbicides, those are absorbed into the plant after the application, and they translocate throughout the plant. So not only are you getting the leaves, you also get down to the root system of the plant, which typically gives you better control, even though it might be a little bit slower acting. We're using these typically on emergent or woody vegetation, and select systemic herbicides depending on the label and how they act, mode of action. You can use them on floating and submerged vegetation as well. There's a list of systemic herbicides on the right here. Contact herbicides and algicides, these are typically quick acting. They kill plant tissue on direct contact. That's where they get their name. Usually we're using them to treat algae. And typically if you've got, say, 100% coverage on a pond, we try to treat in sections. That way you just discourage fish kills and might come from low dissolved oxygen. Contact herbicides don't translocate, meaning that if you don't get a good kill on the plant, you might see regrowth in that season from roots or rhizomes. And like I said, we typically use these on algae, and there's products out there that work really well on submerged plants as well. A list of contact herbicides here on the right for you. So some final considerations for herbicide use. You always want to check your label. Definitely if you're applying in water, around water, near water, you want to make sure it's an aquatic labeled herbicide for usage. Check your restrictions, any off-site movement restrictions, irrigation restrictions. Some products that you apply might say, 3 to 7 days before you can irrigate, or you'll affect off-target plants. Recreation or swimming, re-entry into the area that's being treated could be a concern. That goes hand in hand with the livestock usage and the drinking. And then obviously fish kills. If you apply it correctly, you're probably not going to get a fish kill from toxicity, depending on your water quality parameters, but you might get low DO fish kills. Always read the label and make sure you use proper protective equipment when mixing and applying. Finally, just a couple notes here. Treating during the summer when it's hot or on cloudy days, you can have low DO levels in the pond there, which might stress fish out. If you don't get good coverage, your target plant might regrow in the season without preventative measures being taken. And then once the target plant is gone, you may have other plants take its place. So what we find works best, depending on client budget and other factors, is the combination of these approaches. So proactively treat your water body for nutrients in the early season. That could be by installing those settling pools or forebays. That could be by using phosphate lockers and the such. Mitigate your incoming nutrients using those vectors. Stock your sterile grass carp for your submerged plants that they'll feed upon. Utilize aeration. And doing all that should allow for minor herbicide application during the spring if you do have a bloom or something that has to be treated quickly. And then always check your water quality by grabbing a sample and getting it tested at the lab to kind of dial in your approach. Okay, topic number 2, want to jump right into water quality. Questions that we get around water quality: how is my water quality? How does it affect my fish? How does it affect my pond overall? And what can I do to better my water quality? So let's talk about the parameters that we're looking at when we're talking water quality. I'm going to jump right into all those. Dissolved oxygen. Dissolved oxygen is the amount of oxygen gas present in your water body. Oxygen gets into the water from the atmosphere and through plant photosynthesis. Dissolved oxygen is essential for fish and aquatic life, so it's a very good parameter to check. Levels lower than 3 can stress and kill some species of aquatics. Ideal levels that we look for in a pond are anywhere from 5 to 10. pH would be the next one. So pH is a scale that measures how acidic or basic a substance is. You can see the scale here on your right. It's based from 0 to 14. 7 to 0 is acidic. 7 to 14 would be basic. Most ponds in North Carolina tend to be on the acidic side. We see a lot of 6s, a lot of 6.5s. We try to keep our ponds between 6 and 9 on scale, depending on the management objective. Alkalinity is another important factor to look at. Alkalinity is the buffering capacity of water. It's the measure of carbonates and bicarbonates in your water. So higher alkalinity in a pond will help your pond be buffered from pH swings, because pH does swing throughout the day. And we shoot for 20 ppm or higher would be ideal. Temperature is the next factor. It's a measure of how hot or cold the water is. It's affected by pond depth, the amount of shade a pond gets, the time of the year. It's an important consideration for when you're applying herbicides or trying to treat target plants. Copper, as an example, gets less effective the colder it gets. And then during the spring and the summer, ponds have a tendency to stratify. So if you've got that hypolynium in the pond, you might be trying to target a plant below it, and product might not get to that target plant location. And then stratification also affects the usable water column for aquatic plant life. We'll talk more about stratification in the next topic. Turbidity is the cloudiness or that muddy look caused by suspended particles in the water. This can be caused by runoff, erosion upstream, livestock coming in and out of the pond. It can be caused by organic matter like algae blooms. If you've got suspended sediments, a herbicide consideration, diquat, for example, if you're applying diquat in a muddy pond, you might reduce the effectiveness of the diquat because it tends to bind with the particles that are floating through the water column. So let's talk about some options for remediation. If you have poor water quality or if you're looking to adjust water quality. So you always want to get a water quality test panel completed, just so you know what you're working with and what you're starting with, so you can dial your approach in. Companies like us do it. You can also get it done at labs. Some quick solutions for common issues. If you've got low dissolved oxygen, adding aeration might be a quick fix for you. If you've got less than desirable pH levels, you can do an application of lime or a lime-like product. Same thing for alkalinity. If your alkalinity is low, adding lime to a pond can be a good start. Temperature, you really got to understand how deep your pond is, the amount of shade that it gets. Aeration can help with temperature and can also help with stratification of a pond. By mixing that water, you can regulate your water levels as far as temperature goes a little bit better. And then if you have a turbid pond, depending on what the source of the turbidity is, aeration or just allowing time for settling, or even a lime treatment or alum treatment may help. So I want to jump into what we got, topic number 3, fountains and aeration. So conversations or interest in these units, they're typically centered around wanting to increase the water quality in a pond. And aeration can be a great add to a pond to increase the water quality benefits that you get. Benefits that you get from adequate aeration are increased dissolved oxygen levels. You can get decreased stratification, so you can mix those layers of water better. That in turn will create more usable area for fish and aquatic life. You promote the aerobic bacteria in the pond, which can help break down and facilitate nutrient reduction over time. That's going to reduce nutrient loading. And then you can also have decreased activity for mosquitoes. So when we're talking fountains and aeration with clients, there's 3 categories that we typically talk, and that's going to be display fountains, surface aerators, and then diffused or lake bed aerators. The bottom picture here, if you can see my cursor, is an example of a fountain. This top picture here on the left will be an example of a surface aerator, which I know looks like a fountain. And then you've got diffused aeration, which is the bubblers that sit on the bottom and bubble up through the water column. So some picture examples and some facts on those real quick. This is a display fountain. They provide, beautiful displays depending on the model, but they move less total water volume. In this example, this is a 2 horsepower unit. It moves 160 gallons per minute. Take a note on the display height and the display width. It's a 24-inch height and a 60-inch width, or 60-foot width. This is a surface aerator. Looks similar, but it moves much more water. So the same 2 horsepower unit, just by switching the nozzle out, you can move 350 gallons per minute. You get a 10-foot display height and a 36-foot wide display width. So depending on what you're going for, either one might be the option for you. If you're looking for strictly aeration benefits, you want to kind of look at lake bed aeration, which is the compressors on the shoreline that are tubed out to the diffusers that sit on the lake bottom, and they send the bubbles up throughout the water column. These are better for ponds that are 10 plus in depth, and a 1/2 horsepower unit with 2 diffusers is adequate to do 2 acres of water at 20 feet. So you just get a little bit more bang for your buck depending on what you're trying to do, whether you want something to look at or whether you want something to benefit your pond, or both. Topic number 4 here, the buildup of sediment or the buildup of muck. Questions that we get are typically going to be, my pond's filling in. What can I do? There's a bunch of leaves all over my pond. Should I get them out? The stream feeding my pond keeps depositing sediment. I've got a peninsula forming. What can I do? I want to make my pond deeper. What can I do to make my pond deeper? So ponds naturally try to fill in over time. The process of pond aging, natural pond aging, is called eutrophication, and that is increased richness of nutrients in the pond. And each situation is going to vary depending on what you're dealing with. Contributing factors might be leaf debris, erosion. You can get wash in of sediments. Sediments can come from the upstream development and construction. So you got to kind of look at all the factors. You can see in the pictures here, this pond has growth growing all around it. It's encroaching on that fountain in the middle, and a lot of the usable pond space or water space that was water is just starting to fill in over time. Here's some more ponds. These are actual ponds I've taken pictures of where this process is happening. Some negative effects that you might get from this could be excessive organics that can lead to algal blooms. You can also have aquatic weeds that start to take over. That's parrot's feather that we talked about earlier there on the left. Different miscellaneous weeds on the right. You can have bad smells that come from that, from different gases being trapped into sediments and getting released over time. You have less usable space for recreation or fish habitat. So it literally fills your pond in over time. And then that might also affect your fountain or aeration system if you have one of those. The fountains will not operate outside of the water or sitting on the land. Some options that we can look at to remediate these issues. There's products that attack muck and build up over time, different beneficial bacterias, products that are literally called muck away. There's phosphorus lockers that you can use. Aeration helps as a long-term benefit that helps break down that muck over time as it facilitates the growth of aerobic bacteria. And then what we do a lot of is mechanical dredging, where we use a machine like the one on the bottom there, and we literally scoop and remove the buildup and take it away off site. Our last topic here is fish kills. So we'll just talk fish kills a little bit. We probably get 5 to 10 calls about this a year. Questions we get are, there's some fish dead in my pond. What happened? My pond seems to have turned over. What causes a pond turnover, and what can I do to prevent it? And some of my fish died. Do I have to restock? So fish kills in general, they can occur naturally in a pond. When that happens, it's called pond turnover. They can also happen from improper herbicide use. So if you're applying herbicides the wrong way, you might be making that water toxic for the fish, and that might result in a fish kill. The most common cause that we see and we deal with is DO fish kills, low DO fish kills, dissolved oxygen. Real quickly, what a pond turnover is natural ponds seasonally stratify over time. So you've got different layers of cool and warm water that stratify out of the pond. The cooler water typically ends up on the bottom, is denser, and it settles there. The warmer water migrates to the top. It's typically oxygenated, has a little bit more oxygen. If you've got an event like a hard rain or a hard wind, those layers can turn over or mix, and that mixes the oxygen deprived water with the oxygen rich water, changes the levels, stresses the fish out, and that's typically what leads to the low DO fish kill. So you can get it from herbicide use as well, fish kills that is. Used correctly and per the label, herbicides generally aren't the reason for most fish kills, so they're not inherently toxic to the fish. Some products can be, but you got to read your label and know what you're doing. Copper products can be toxic to fish in some situations. Endothol products can be toxic to fish in some situations. But again, most of them happen from a low DO kill, from killing off too many plankton from your herbicide use. And those guys are producing oxygen. You take them out of the equation and they're no longer producing that oxygen, and that might stress your fish out. Some final thoughts surrounding fish kills. Most of the time, the entire pond is not killed off. Usually fish survive to reproduce. Larger fish, if they have died, might be an issue. They take longer to decompose. They might be there for a little bit longer. Smaller fish are typically decomposed quickly or taken up by wildlife, birds, turtles, etc. Some proactive measures you can take to prevent fish kills is adding aeration, especially lake bed aerators, to stratify your pond and add oxygen throughout the water column. Make sure if you're applying herbicides, you're doing it properly and you're following the label. And if you're treating heavy coverage, you're treating in sections. And then finally, just careful timing of it. It's a little bit easier to treat when it's cooler than when it's in the hot of the summer. So with that, I've got a couple of resources here that I pulled information off of for this presentation. Those will be available to you guys that you can access as quick links. And with that, I think we'll end the presentation and go into any questions that we might have.
All right, Roger, thank you. We do have several questions, and folks, if you have questions, I ask that you remember to post them in the Q&A feature of Zoom so that we don't lose track of them. Very first question was from Anpater Near, and I'm sorry if I mispronounced the name, but is smartweed native?
Smartweed, I think, is a native plant, but I think it tends to grow heavily on the shoreline, and if left unchecked, it can just kind of take over the area. So we maintain it by mowing it, cutting it, and then you can treat it with glyphosate and imazapyr to kind of knock it back. But I believe it is a native.
All right, the next question is from Vance Fowler. Is triploid grass carp for alligator weed?
As far as a control measure, no, I wouldn't pick grass carp for alligator weed control. Alligator weed's a tough one. When we treat alligator weed, we don't treat it early in the season. We try to give it maybe a month or two into the season to where we've got a lot of foliar leaves that we can get product on. We're going to do glyphosate and imazapyr with some kind of surfactant, usually a sticker or a penetrant to get the chemical into the plant. But the grass carp will not control it. A lot of that plant grows out of the water. The root system is in the water, and they're not really gonna eat on that, so it's not going to be very effective.
All right, next question is from Tyler Swanson. How long does a single application of Fosolox stay effective before needing to reapply?
So Foslock, we don't have a lot of experience with. We use a product called Utrizorb, which is a similar product. It's a C-Pro product. I believe that Foslock used to be used by C-Pro, but you'd have to do your research on that. But when we apply the Utrizorb product, we'll do it early season, and I'm not sure what the exact rates are, but there's a percentage that you can apply per pound that takes out a percentage of the phosphorus. Like 50 pounds of the product takes out a pound of phosphorus, and a pound of phosphorus can lead to so much algal growth. So we try to base it and dial it in on that. And when you do it, it can last for, 60 to 90 days, depending on how much phosphorus is actually in the pond. That might be enough for the entire season. But that's why we would suggest like a water chemistry panel to know what the actual levels are so you can dial in how much product to use. That way you're not, spending more money wasting product and putting more chemical into the pond than needed.
Okay, next question is from Anpetu Nier. What do you recommend to control Japanese stilt grass?
Japanese stiltgrass, I don't think is one of them plants that grows. I'm not really familiar with that one. We don't get a lot of calls on that, and I haven't seen that a lot in the field. I would have to look up that plant and then research a product to apply to it. But my guess is that like a glyphosate, a mazifer mix would be adequate. Something that I would spray on smartweed or alligator weed or primrose. Seems like they would both be similar, so they should work similar, but I'd have to research that one.
Next question is from R. Skelton. What if your pond is spring fed and is super clear? Can that be a bad thing? Pond is large, similar to a small lake at 40 acres.
Yeah, so spring-fed ponds, check the water chemistry and what you've got going on water chemistry wise. That might have something to do with it if you're trying to combat some kind of nuisance plant. If the pond is shallow and you get a let's say like a hydrilla in there, if it's clear, there's more light going to penetrate, so you might be feeding that growth. If it's a clear pond and there's no growth in there, I'm not sure I would be very concerned about it. But if you start to see plants grow, they might be growing more prolifically because the pond is clear. Um, you can kind of actively treat that with pond dyes. They may be effective or at least discourage some of that growth. And then if you're stocking grass carp, 10 to 15 per acre, that's going to be a good proactive approach as well.
All right. So the next question is from an anonymous attendee. How is the dredged material disposed of?
Yep. So it really depends on the situation. Some material that we remove from farm ponds ends up on the farm. So we will remove the material, we'll stage the material, and when it's kind of dried out and workable, we'll load it up and we'll spread it on the site. If it's a material that's coming out of, say, a pond that might have like a toxicity concern, because we do a lot of stormwater pond dredging, and those ponds are designed to uptake nutrients and take out pollutants. Sometimes you have to get that material disposed of at an approved site. So at that point, we got to permit it, get it tested, and then take it to the site that's licensed to take that material. But most farm ponds, that material, to save cost on the project, instead of hauling it away and using trucks and fuel and time, we'll spread it on site and we'll stabilize it, and it just kind of becomes part of the landscape.
Debbie Coons would like to know how to control cattails.
Yeah, cattails, we see ponds where folks will leave them around the edges, but then if they want to get rid of them, if you cut them and just cut them or just mow them, they're going to come back. They grow on a rhizome system, so that's a runner that goes underneath the ground. It shoots up a sprout, goes a little bit further, shoots up a sprout. So just cutting it or topping it off, or even just applying like a contact herbicide like diquat, will burn it and knock some of it back, but it's just going to come right back again, either that same season or the next season. So use a systemic herbicide like a glyphosate. Typically, we'll do a glyphosate and a mazifer mix, and that product, and use a stick or two or a penetrant surfactant and adjuvant that facilitates that chemical getting into the plant. But once you get that systemic herbicide into the plant, it'll translocate down into those roots and into those rhizomes, and you'll get a much more effective kill on it. So glyphosate, a mazifer, and a surfactant, and get good coverage on the leaves.
Again, from Ampetu Nair, do spring-fed ponds have less pond turnover because of the constant water flow?
I couldn't really say. when I get a call about a pond turnover or a fish kill, we might ask the question if it's spring fed or check and see if it's got aeration installed. I think logically thinking, if there is mixing, that would reduce the chance of a fish kill. And if the spring is adding, oxygen into the pond from that mixing, that may help, but I couldn't say definitively.
All right, here's a comment from Don Curtis. He has a 50-acre natural pond with thick lily pads along the first 100 feet. He applied herbicide once and it killed the lily pads, but then in a few weeks, big brown mats of dead vegetation floated to the top.
Okay, depending on what the vegetation is, if it's dead vegetation, it's eventually going to decompose and go away. If it's an algae that's coming back, which can happen because when you kill off a plant that grows thick like lilies, you're increasing nutrients into the pond, and there might already be nutrients there. And when you kill something and take away its space, something else might come into that space. So really identify what it is. Is it dead plant material, or is it some other plant taking its space? That would be kind of step one. And then depending on what that is, if it's another plant, I would, treat it effectively with a target herbicide. If it's dead material, maybe just give it time and see if it disperses and goes away. I do know that lilies over time, when they get thick, they form this thing called tussock. And I've seen those floating in ponds. And really, for us, we remove them with machines, get them on the shoreline, and then haul them out with our long reach excavators.
All right. Debbie Coons is wondering, is systemic herbicides dangerous to wildlife and cattle?
Not inherently, no. You need to read the label based off of which one you're trying to use, because the label is the law. It's going to tell you how much you can apply and what restrictions you have to adhere to when you're applying it. So depending on what one you're applying and at what level, I would reference the label to answer that question.
All right. The next question is from Sarah Cleatherms. Looking back at the slides, what is the best way to control a water shield type plant problem?
Yeah, so water shield's kind of like a lily. It is a lily. Water shield is susceptible. Let me reference my notes real quick. There's a product that we put on it called Depth Charge, which is flumioxazin and 2,4-D. 2,4-D is very effective. And some other products that you could use on it from a herbicide state would be glyphosate. Glyphosate's a systemic herbicide that'll work on it. Imazapyr will work on it, and 2,4-D will work on it. Water shield's got when it's growing, it's got that leaf on the top of the water, but it's also got that waxy cuticle. So you got to get past that. So when you're applying herbicide on it, use some kind of adjuvant that's like a penetrator and a sticker to allow that herbicide to sit on the leaf longer and actually get into the plant. And then a systemic herbicide like glyphosate, imazapyr, that's going to translocate down into the roots, and that should give you some effective control.
All right. Cheryl Allman, she has a farm pond with lots of lily pads. What is the best way to get rid of them?
So if you want to get rid of them, if it's a small section of them, you can dredge them, mechanically remove them, cut them and remove them. But then again, if you don't get rid of the root system, they're going to come back. You can treat them with herbicide. A systemic herbicide will do a good job, and they're kind of like the water shields, like glyphosate, imazapyr, 2,4-D will do a good job. And you can't just kill the leaf on top of the water. You got to get down and remove the root system too, whether that's mechanically removing them with a machine or using a herbicide to get down into that root system and kill it there.
All right, a question from Courtney. Are there any special concerns with fish kills from applying fluoridone to milfoil?
No, I've never heard of a fish kill with fluoridone. I'm not sure how toxic that one is to fish, but I haven't heard of it being toxic. We worry about fish kills with herbicides when we're applying copper, if it's in soft water and we're doing like a copper sulfate, or if we're applying hydrothol, which is an endothol product, which is very toxic to fish. Those products are tough to use, but fluoridone and milfoil, the only concern that I would have would be a low DO kill. But fluoridone is a systemic herbicide and it typically works really slow. So when you apply that herbicide, it's probably going to take 3 to 4 weeks before you start seeing something happen with the plant. And because it's happening so slowly and it's not happening quickly, that's going to help mitigate the low DO kill in itself. It's different than going and treating planktonic algae with a contact herbicide like copper, and you kill them all off in 24 hours or 48 hours. It's so slow acting. I don't think I would be worried about it, but always read the label and follow the label.
Question from David. What is the best alternative for agriculture lime? Access to the pond is very difficult.
Yep. So you've probably seen videos on YouTube of guys applying ag lime and they're putting it on the barges and they're spraying off of it with a pump, and it takes a lot of ag lime to get a result when you're trying to buffer pH or increase alkalinity. We use a product called Calcis. Right, wrong, or indifferent, it will take the place. 5 gallons is equivalent to 2,000 pounds of ag lime. So a 5 gallon container, imagine like a 5 gallon bucket, takes the place of 2,000 pounds of ag line. That's just as it's advertised. We've been using that product for several years now, and it does a really good job. I think the rate on it is 5 to 10 gallons per acre. Will increase the pH by a point. Get a water test, see what the levels are at right now, and consider a product like that. It's like a liquid lime supplement. We used to use a product called liquid lime in the past too. It's very similar to Calcis, but we've been using Calcis.
All right. The next question is from Rhett. You see pond fountains on the internet now for $300 to $600. Are they worth the cost? As most sprinklers that I see are $2,000 to $3,000. This is for a 5-acre pond.
Yeah, so Amazon's got everything. That's why they call it A to Z. You can get anything on Amazon. Fountains are a pump that sits on a float that's connected to some source of power, and the pump pushes the water through a nozzle. That's what it is. Now, there's manufacturers out there that have been doing this stuff a long time, and they've gotten really good at it. There are some low-cost economical fountains. I think the cheapest one that we carry is like $1,500, but we can also sell ones for a 5-acre lake that go up to like $15,000. A general rule of thumb, if you're going for aeration and it's a shallower pond, 1 horsepower per acre. So for a 5-acre pond, you would want a 5 horsepower unit to adequately aerate, depending on your water depth. I would say a $300 or $600 unit online is not going to be equivalent to a $6,000 unit that I would sell you if it was like an Aqua Control or Aqua Master. Casco is a good brand. Outdoor Water Solutions. You get what you pay for. So depending on budget, that's all. That's where I leave that at. You just get what you pay for. It might be adequate in your case. Just depends.
All right. The next question is from Tyler Swanson. Is mechanical filtration, thinking parabolic mesh filter or carbon filter, effective in treating algae, turbidity, excess nutrients?
I don't have a lot of experience with mechanical filtration on larger ponds that we maintain. I have seen 4 bays and settling pools be very effective in mitigating nutrients on anything from a 1/4 acre up to a 3-acre pond. I'm not really sure of that product that you're talking about. We've got some smaller ponds that we maintain. They call them water gardens and koi ponds. They're like 5 to 10,000 gallon systems in backyards. And they use a combination of mechanical and biological filtration. So they've got skimmers, which kind of act like pool skimmers that take debris off of the water, capturing it. And then they've got waterfalls that have rocks and algae and substrate for bacteria to colonize on. And that adds a biological filtration aspect to it. And in that combination, they work well on those smaller systems. So I think what you're saying or talking about could probably work, but I would have to look at the scenario and dive into it a little bit deeper.
All right. Next from Thomas Beal and Lynette Fossen. Which tree that thrives in water do you recommend? The board is wanting trees in the water. Sounds like maybe an HOA board or something that's required, some sort of board that's managing a pond or something, maybe.
Yeah, we do a lot of shoreline aquatics. They're not trees. They can be woody shrubs like swamp rose, marshmallow. But if you want like a tree, like maybe I'd have to research that one. Maybe a cypress or a willow that's not a black willow because black willows are their root system will just destroy a shoreline. Maybe like a water willow or something like that. I have to research that one. My email is going to be in the presentation somewhere. If you want to email me that question, I'll look it up and see if I can't get you an answer.
Depending on where they're at, one tree that comes to mind possibly would be a bold cypress.
But yeah, bald cypress. We don't plant a lot of those though. We just don't plant them. So I'm not sure.
Yep. All right. Next question is from Ken Stewart. What herbicide is recommended for phragmites?
Phragmites, we don't mess with that guy a lot here where I'm at in Raleigh, North Carolina. I think they get that down at the coast. I'd have to research it to be sure just because we don't treat a lot of it, but I would think that a systemic herbicide that can get down into the root system would be best, but I'm not sure which particular one that I would recommend without researching the plant. And I just don't know because I don't have a lot of experience treating it myself.
Okay, question from Paige from NRCS. How does the shore material change your pond management? And she gives example of sand versus riprap versus pebbles, etc.
So I guess it just depends on usage and what the client's expectations or objectives are. If a shoreline is sandy, it just means that you might have different plant growth growing there as opposed to say riprap or pebbles. Um, it doesn't really have a bearing on how we would treat it. If it just depends on what might be growing in that area from a plant and a herbicide standpoint. Um, and then I think the only other consideration would be if you've got a rocky shoreline and you want to go swimming, we probably need to remove those rocks and come back in with maybe a sandier base soil that you can walk on and not hurt your feet.
All right. Last question from ML Berry. They say they're new to ponds. They just bought a house with a tiny pond, less than 10 square feet. Is this presentation still fully applicable, or does my pond size warrant special care?
So our company does lake and pond management for ponds that are an eighth of an acre up to 60-acre lakes. But we also have a division that is specific to what we call water gardens and koi ponds. So those smaller systems, all the science behind it and the ecology behind the system is going to be very similar. So the same water that's in your koi pond is going to be the same water that's in the 1 acre lake, but you're going to manage it differently. Those smaller systems, they're enclosed, they're contained. They don't have streams or anything like that running into them. So when I was talking about the mechanical and biological filtration being very similar to like how you would manage a pool, you're going to want to look for stuff like that. Go on YouTube and look up Aquascape. And I'm not trying to plug the vendor that we use for our materials, but they've got all kinds of educational resources on how to take care of backyard water gardens and koi ponds from 50-gallon systems up to 25,000-gallon systems. Those are smaller systems.
All right, we've believe we've answered everybody's questions. So we do appreciate the fact that the audience was participating, providing questions for us today. Do want to thank Roger for taking the time out of his busy schedule and everything with running a company and all that to share his knowledge with the group. Leslie, do you have anything you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Roger. That was an excellent presentation. Just a reminder, if you have an interest in the North Carolina Tree Farm Program, our contact information was on the slide that we just had up a few minutes ago, and we're happy to talk with you about membership in our program. And also a reminder that when you are a member, you do get a discount on the products and services that Roger's company offers. So thank you very much.
Thank you all.
All right, thanks everybody. That's it for today's webinar.